2017. Wow. Really? 2017. Leadership failure. Total, utterly, and abysmal. Institutionalized harm. Misogyny made normal, and oppression. Sanctioned racism and organized hate. Regressive policies that target the non-white, the non-straight, the non-gender conforming, the vulnerable, the poor, and the very earth itself. I don't know about you, but if I had my druthers, I'd rather put 2017 in the ash bin. I'd rather go ahead and not look back. I'd rather brace myself for the new and the up-and-coming 2018. But I've got an assignment for us before we get to midnight tonight. And that is to practice a little bit of Sankofa. Looking back before you look forward, and looking back so that in looking forward, your looking forward is informed in a better way than just blindly barreling in to the new year. But let me warn you, and this is probably pretty obvious to most of us, upon closer examination of 2017, we will see hurt and disappointment and disarray and all of those things that unfortunately will be a part of the annals of history when we reflect on this year. But I want us to understand this, that in looking back and seeing the hurt and the disappointment and the disarray, we also need to look in the crevices, in the fractures, in the corners that sometimes caused our tears to come forth, because I submit to you that even in those places, if you look hard enough, you'll see God at work. Now, to be clear, when I say that, understand that I don't mean by that God is the author of, the progenitor of hurt and pain and disappointment. It's easy, but at the same time, I think sloppy theology for us to simply attribute suffering to some plan of God that is beyond our scope and our reach. Now, suffering and its realities are complex, and it is far beyond me in the space of a few moments on a Sunday morning to unpack what indeed suffering means and why it happens. But I can tell you this, that the God I'm in love with does not have it as a purpose to hurt me or to make me sorrowful. And we need to understand that we were watching, as many of you in these last several days, the terrible and tragic unfolding of the fire that claimed a dozen lives, at least up in the Bronx a few days ago. And as folk are wont to do, the memorial, the Ersatz memorial, was placed in front of the apartment building, and the candles and the flowers, et cetera, were there. And it just caught my eye as the newscast was going on, and they sort of panned that, and somebody put a little placard up that said simply, well, God must have needed a few more angels in heaven. And I cringed, because while in some ways that might begin to attempt to answer some difficult questions, I just can't believe in my heart that God is the author of pain and agony. But I do believe that God can be present in the midst of difficulty and pain and agony. So, 2017, while much of it may not have been the design of God to unfold upon us in the sorrowful ways that it did, I can say to you this morning that I believe in my heart of hearts that God has been active and present all along. If we can see God on our mountaintops, we also should be able to see God in our valleys. So, our responsibility this morning, our first act before, again, we get to the joys of the new year, is to look back. And, just like when the doctor gets ready to give you a treatment or shot or whatever, they may say to you, well, this may sting a bit. But I submit to you that if you look back and you think about those places in the unfolding of this past year where sometimes the hurt was the greatest, it's in those places that we can see the comforting presence of an unfailing God. It may be difficult at first, but I really believe God has been with us all the while. Martin King said it better than I could ever say it. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Those things may not have come as we wanted them to come, when we wanted them to come. The right things are still yet to come. But I believe in my heart of hearts that God is busily and fully at work in our existence and in our reality. And you see, the prophet Isaiah, when he wrote those words, understood that there was still rebuilding to happen as the nation regathered. It wasn't by any stretch of the imagination perfect, but there was a trust that God would yet still be at work as things came together, and I believe that. And I also believe that if you look at the larger picture of history as it unfolds, there can be difficult seasons. There can be times of tempestuous tumult, but tyrants and despots and even the incompetent and immature and unqualified who happen to occupy seats of power, Oval Office, do not have the final say. If you live long enough, you know what you find out? Folk come and folk go. Tyrants come and tyrants go. I love the wonderful poem, Tennyson. And I believe it was Yeats who wrote that wonderful poem about Ozymandias, King of Kings. And Ozymandias was basically a rubble, a stump of a statue that was on a desperate plain. And I don't mean to sound ominous and overly negative, but I'm going to say this. Sorry. Whether we have the measure to live long enough to see it, and I don't say this with relish, by the way. I'm just reporting the facts. That someday, maybe many years from now, there'll be a news article. It'll be above the fold on the New York Times. And it'll have a certain person's name. And next to that person's name, it'll have parentheses. And within that parentheses, it'll have the year of that person's birth, which might have been somewhere in the late 40s, I don't know. But it'll have, I can assure you this, as long as we live in the existence that we live in, it'll have another year on the other side of that. Now, I don't wish calamity upon anybody, but all I'm trying to say to you is this. The tyrants come and tyrants go. Despots come and despots go. But the last time I checked, I know a God whose faithfulness, whose presence endures, as the Bible says, through all generations. And if we can anchor in that kind of faithfulness, it won't be just a matter of surviving a period of history, but beyond surviving, we will indeed thrive. So a guidepost for 2018 is in part celebrating that God did not abandon us in 2017. There have been acts of revolutionary love on a large scale within this wonderful church family and on a human scale. You've lent your voices and your presence to the issues and concerns that occupy the national landscape, but you've also touched each other's lives. You gathered around your senior pastor when her mother was called from labor to eternal rest. You've made it a point to uphold and uplift each other in seasons of indeed challenge and distress. But again, we've been part of larger conversations as it is as well. I've seen the fact that our presence in the world is important in the small, but also in the large. And just like the prophet is saying here, it's important to just simply note that you are here and that your voices are heard and that you will not be silent and you will not shut up. And maybe the best resolution going into 2018 after looking back on 2017 is saying, I'm going to go into 2018 and I'm not going to shut up. It works. At the very beginning of this now almost year that has ended, we saw one of the largest gatherings ever recorded, and I'm not talking about the inauguration. But we saw women and men from all over to gather in Washington and in the cities around the country and even the globe. And the naysayers said, oh, well, that's just a flash in the pan and it's fine. Now we've got a few pink hats still lying around our home. But here's the thing. The momentum and the power of that moment didn't subside. Collectively, whether they knew it or not, people who were gathering at that moment were saying, we are not going to shut up. And along with what we saw there in January, we've been seeing subsequent to that, thanks be to God, women and some men, but women saying, I'm not going to be quiet. I'm not going to let anybody abuse, harass, or push me to the side. My voice will be heard. And the halls of power are trembling and shaking because women are able to say, me too. So we understand this morning, just like the prophet tells us, that we're called to not shut up. We need to understand that we're called to resist, but also to persist, to love radically and revolutionarily, to share our joy unfailingly, to work for justice unwaveringly, to speak truth to power. So if we look over our shoulders at 2017, we'll see that has worked. Now, has the battle ended and are we done? Are we finished? Of course not. But we're still here. We're still here to continue doing the work. We are here. And sometimes the most powerful witness and testimony we can have is simply to be present. Because in being present, it means that I'm available. If I'm present, I'm available for God to be at work in me and for me, therefore, to be used by God to be at work in the world. So before we try to figure out what the particularities are, and I love the resolutions, by the way, that were offered up. And was it Brooke? It was real zen, do nothing. I love that, just kind of be in a zone. But before we sort of delve into what our resolutions are going to be, maybe we need to understand that simply being present, being attuned to what the Bible calls that still small voice, telling us that we're not in this by ourselves. In our hallway at home, we have a photograph of my great-grandmother, my grandfather, and two of my great-uncles. Turn of the century in Kentucky. And interestingly enough, you know how you had to stand stolidly and still for photographs like that to be taken, but what's so amazing as I look at that face, their faces almost on a daily basis, I think about the fact that they lived in unimaginable measures of adversity. My grandmother, the progeny of those who had been enslaved and those who had been slaveholders. But the fact is that somehow, and they might not have been able to articulate it in profound, at least discernibly profound theological terms, but there was a faith that led them on, that allowed for them to step forward into a future that they couldn't define or understand, but at the same time, they could trust that God was with them in. And in the same measure, I'm asking for us to do the same thing as this new year unfolds, to be able to step into a new year because we've seen what God has done in the old year and to be present and available for what it is that God will do with each of us. So don't shut up and be present. In a few moments, we're going to sing, "We Shall Overcome." Charles Albert Tindley was a black Methodist minister born on the eastern shore of Maryland in 1851. He wrote a song called "I Will Overcome," and that was the place from which "We Shall Overcome" sprang forth. And the arrangement that we'll sing in just a few moments was actually, I looked and saw that it was actually, the arrangement is done by a friend of mine, Nolan Williams, but the song harkens back to the sentiments of Charles Albert Tindley, who was himself a social justice warrior. And one of the things that's telling about it is that when he originally wrote the song, it's changed a little bit. Of course, we use it as an anthem of the movement, but one of the lines that he used in the original version of that song was, "If in my heart I do not yield, I'll overcome someday." And so maybe our understanding about going into a new year is that we're called by God's faithfulness to not yield, to not shut up, to be present, to not yield, even though the overwhelming and countervailing forces seem to so much want to crush us down. We've got too many people who stand as examples of the fact that you can't shut up. Would you tell Fannie Lou Hamer that you're going to shut up? Would you tell Ella Baker that you're going to shut up? Would you tell Rosa Parks that you're going to shut up? Would you tell Malcolm you're going to shut up? Would you tell Martin you're going to shut up? Would you tell Nelson Mandela that you're going to shut up? Would you tell Cesar Chavez that you're going to shut up? Would you tell Edie Windsor that you're going to shut up? No. Because they'd say to you, no, the victory doesn't come quickly. But my work and my commitment to the victory is a certainty. So, if you look back over 2017, there's a lot to take into account. But there's a lot that should give us strength. Because the very fact is that we're here. We've made our way through. And we've not done it by ourselves. So, look back. Shout out. Don't shut up. And be present for what God will do. The promise in this passage is that the beauty that we've already been given will be magnified, that we are beautiful, that we are valuable, that we are precious, just as I think Darren said in his prayer, just as we are, because we are the creative imagination of God already. And we're called to celebrate that. From the musical version of The Color Purple, in the song, "I'm Here," that great philosopher, theologian, Seeley, and she was, if you read the book, all her letters were written to God. She was a theologian. She also endured and overcame abuse. She also endured her very existence seeking to be blotted out by those who would oppress her and press her down. But she overcame all of that. And in that wonderful song, here's her credo: "I believe I have inside of me everything that I need to live a bountiful life. And all the love alive in me, I'll stand as tall as the tallest tree. And I'm thankful for every day that I'm given, both the easy and the hard ones that I'm living. But most of all, I'm thankful for loving who I really am. I'm beautiful. Yes, I'm beautiful. And I'm here." Oh, there have been so many who've tried to tear apart what we hold as dear and important, but you're still here. There have been people who've capitalized on hurling invectives and divisive language, but you're still here. There are those who would raise torches of division and hatred and try to tear down the very fabric of our society, but you are still here. You're beautiful, and you're here. Look back. Don't shut up. And be here.